So today I want to, wait a minute. Am I recording in 2010 or am I recording in 2021, almost 2022? That's more like it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the Danger Zone. This is Alvaro Cortez Jr., aka Lance Danger. Thank you so much for coming around again. This week I wanted to talk about another comic that's celebrating its 30th anniversary, and that is Cyberforce from Top Cow Comics and Image Comics. And it is definitely one of my all-time favorite launch titles from Image Comics. You know, Spawn, Shadowhawk, Wildcats, Cyberforce. Those to me were my absolute four favorite launch titles from Image Comics, especially Spawn and Cyberforce. Tom McFarlane and Marc Silvestri were perhaps one of the most influential artists for me personally when I started wanting to dabble in artwork and create my own comics as well. It was around that time that I was starting to kind of create my own comics and my own characters. As I stated in the previous video talking about Superman, it was around this time, 1991, 1992, that I was starting to get more and more into the superhero genre and into more of the teenage focused kind of comic books in terms of target audience. I've stated before, I started collecting Archie comics, Muppet Babies, Looney Tune comics, Disney comics, ever since I was a little kid, before I even started kindergarten, because of my parents focusing on having me to learn how to read, especially in English, before I started school. My father was a Mexican immigrant, so he didn't want my sister or nor I to kind of go through the hardships that he and my mom is Puerto Rican, but she had just moved relatively recently to New York when she had met my father. So they kind of wanted us to be bilingual. So I was born in Brooklyn. So at home, my parents would speak to my sister and myself in Spanish, but they would make us watch TV in English and make us read in English so that we could be proficient in both languages and not go through any hardships that either of them went through. So I had a love of comic books since I was a child, really, since before even starting school. So as I grew up and my tastes evolved, and as I mentioned before, I believe when Batman 91 came out, Batman 89 came out, that's when I started to get more interested in the more kind of teen, more adult comics. And unfortunately, I wasn't buying X-Men comics, like the more mainstream Marvel, DC comics at the time. So I did miss out as a kid when McFarlane runs came out on The Amazing Spider-Man and on Spider-Man. Marc Silvestri's run on Wolverine and Uncanny X-Men. Jim Lee's run on Uncanny X-Men. Rob Liefeld's run on New Mutants and then X-Force. So I kind of missed out on those formative years of what eventually built up to the Image Comics years. So when Image Comics first came out, that was pretty much the time that I started buying comics like Batman and X-Men and Spider-Man. So in many ways, those launch titles were introductions to me to those particular artists, actually. So Spawn and Cyberforce to me was even more mind-blowing because I didn't know where they came from. Thankfully, I had a couple of geek friends back then that were comic book collectors and were buying comics when McFarlane and Jim Lee and Silvestri and all these artists were working at Marvel at the time. So some of them would kind of borrow me, let me their comics and whatnot. And I was just blown away by the quality of art, especially with Tom McFarlane and Spawn, and of course with Marc Silvestri and Cyberforce. Marc Silvestri's artwork, it's kind of hard to describe it because the first time that I saw like Jim Lee and Tom McFarlane, it kind of made me feel like, okay, like there's definitely different tiers to the artwork, especially compared from genre to genre, that kind of keeps escalating and keeps getting different. Like I almost said better, but better is not the word I was looking for, different, according to each genre. And those were the artists that kind of made me realize that, along with other artists as well, like Tom Lyle, Jim Aparo, which were around on Batman, and the Robin miniseries also were coming out around that time as well. And Joe Quesada, like he was the first artist that made me actually want to draw and make my own comics when the Ray came out and whatnot in the 90s, the Ray miniseries from DC Comics, as I stated before. But Marc Silvestri's art, like his art was the first comic book artwork that I looked at it and I just went, that art is just cool. It's just, there's no really way to define it other than it's just such cool artwork. I mean, just look at this cover for this trade. I look at this rip claw in the back of it. This is just the definition of cool right there. It could have been called Cool Force, and I would have just ate it up. So of course, Marc Silvestri became a huge influence in my artwork when I first started to want to illustrate and make comics, because from his storytelling to his figures, to his backgrounds, to the details, to the cross-hatching, because as much as I loved Tom McFarlane, and I still love his art to death, and he is my all-time favorite artist, in terms of storytelling, especially way back when Spawn started out, sometimes it was a bit confusing, especially since I was just starting out to elevate to different kind of genres and age brackets in comics as well. So it was a bit confusing sometimes, even though I really, really loved the artwork. But everything about Marc Silvestri, again, was just cool. And I know, you can say whatever you want to say about the quality of the writing of the book, or that it was just an X-Men knockoff, that it was just pretty much a rip-off of whatever he was doing before on Marvel. Shit. But I have to say that even back then when I was a kid, maybe because I didn't grow up reading those runs in particular when they were working at Marvel, my thought process was, even back then when I was like in 7th, 8th grade, was, well, if they want to sell something, they might as well go with what's familiar, Like, they're not going to do a romantic comedy just coming off of X-Men, and they're trying to like make their name for themselves as an independent publisher. They're going to go with what's familiar and build from there, from those foundations that they're going to be laying down. So I guess even when I was little, I kind of had that sort of business sense, probably inherited from my father. He always tried to do a lot of business type stuff when I was a kid. So I guess I always been somewhat entrepreneurial in that sense. So I can actually see it from that point of view. So I personally didn't mind at all that they looked like X-Men or Spider-Man or Batman or whatever. To me, it just looked cool. It was fun. It was entertaining. And to a preteen like me, that was all I needed to just have some escapism and just inspiration fuel to create my own worlds as well. So Cyberforce, happy 30th anniversary. There is going to be a Kickstarter that is currently running actually right now that's going to be crowdfunding to release a hardcover collection of, I believe it's the first 12 issues or 13 issues, something like that. I definitely am going to participate in that Kickstarter. Once again, Cyberforce was very, very instrumental in making me decide to create my own creations. And not only is there a Kickstarter to fund that trade paperback hardcover for Cyberforce, there's actually been an announcement for this year's annual Top Cow Talent Hunt, which is actually going to be revolving around Cyberforce as well. I believe the script for the artist participation is going to be based on a Cyberforce script. And if you're going to participate as a writer, you have to write like a 20-page, one-shot, self-contained story of Cyberforce characters. So Cyberforce is kind of coming back in a big way. They've been kind of on and off throughout the years, especially when Silvestri himself wasn't on the title anymore. So it is very cool to see Cyberforce kind of have this little bit of a comeback for its 30th anniversary. And if you were a big fan of Cyberforce like I was, you can definitely leave a comment below to kind of know how you feel about it. If you have kept up with Cyberforce throughout the years. I know at one point they even tried to experiment a little bit with doing free issues of Cyberforce at comic book shops, and they tried to do like a digital stuff as well. They've been very experimental over the last years with Cyberforce in terms of stories and the way that you can obtain it. So it's very exciting to see Cyberforce come back and coming back a little bit more to its original roots as well. And if you're a McFarlane, it's cool if you're a McFarlane fan also. He did do issue 13, I believe, or 12 of Cyberforce when they did the whole crossover of Image Founders doing other Image Founders comics, which was very cool. But if you were a Marc Silvestri fan, you can definitely leave a comment as well if you were a fan of Cyberforce or The Darkness, his creation, Witchblade. You can definitely leave a comment as well saying what is your favorite property or what was your favorite point of Silvestri's career, like whether that was with Wolverine, Uncanny X-Men, the X-Men run with Grant Morrison. He did do that one storyline on Grant Morrison's send-off from the X-Men series back in the day. So yeah, Cyberforce is back and it's very exciting. Thank you all for watching, and I hope I'll catch you all next time.